My name is Chaim Angel. I'm the National Scholar of the Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals. I also teach Tanakh at Yeshiva University. I want to start just by thanking Lincoln Square Synagogue while we have Rabbi Robinson, who's heavily on the move. Rabbi Robinson is a very busy man and always is heavily on the move, but his daughter Esther just got engaged. So he's extra on the move, so we want to wish him mazal tov. Since Lincoln Square Synagogue opened up its doors in the 60s, it always has been just a paragon for community education in every imaginable way, and it continues to be so. It really lives up to that tradition. I had the privilege myself, when I lived on the West Side, which seems like lifetimes ago by now, but all the same, it's good to see so many friends and people with whom I've learned. And for 4 years, we learned together right here in this room, and it was something very special, and that I continue to have fond memories of and contact with the people with whom I learned. The Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals is a phenomenal organization. I just wanted to introduce what we do very briefly. My father opened it in the year 2007 with the express purpose of saving the world. He has... We're halfway there. Yeah. So we haven't solved everything yet, but it's actually truly incredible what we have accomplished, largely through the work of my father. There are 5 different Talmudic tractates that end with a line that Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam, that the sages bring peace to the world. Our mentor and teacher, Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, if he were in Pirkei Avot, it would be Hu Haya Omer. I don't know how many times I heard the same quip from him, but the quip always was, whenever I would say hello to him, he'd say, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam is single-handed proof that the rabbis of the Talmud had an excellent sense of humor. And the reason is that, alas, sometimes Talmidei Chachamim, great Torah scholars, don't always bring peace to the world. Sometimes they cause a lot of communal friction in one form or another. So I appreciate Dr. Lamb's humorous quip on this particular issue, but I still take the naive reading that the sages meant it, and that it really is the primary task of Talmidei Chachamim to build bridges between people who disagree. The Talmud actually celebrates diversity. There's a bracha when a large number of Jews get together. There's a blessing that you make. Baruch Chacham Harazim. Blessed be God who is the wise creator of secrets. The idea is that no two people bring together the same voice. Each one of us has something different to say, and we are supposed to have something different to say. There's this silly cliche that people still use. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Ha ha. Now, there may be some truth to that, but the reality is that any learned Jew, 50 opinions. Right? If you just learn Tanakh, you learn Talmud, you learn Halakha, you learn the vast corpus of Jewish literature, or even a section of it, that's what we do. We disagree with one another, and that's the way it's supposed to be, because the Tanakh, God's Torah, is infinite. It's the divine word, and we mortals are trying to figure it out. Not only is it not surprising that we disagree, but it's desirable that we disagree. The issue is not disagreement. We're not trying to create conformity. Torah and the Talmud wants diversity, not conformity. But what the problem is in our world that we live in today, as we all understand, there are not just disagreements, there are rifts. Rifts are bad. When Jewish people live together in any community, whether in a country, in a city, in a town, wherever it is, and they cannot even speak to each other or not respectfully, then we're failing. And that's something that the Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals very much is working hard to try to correct through good Torah scholarship. The logic is, let's look at the different opinions that are out there and realize that every single person should find an avenue that speaks to him or to her into the tradition. There are so many valid avenues, we need to keep them all open. And number 2, on the rabbinic level, rabbis need to be conscious of and speaking about the diversity of opinions to give communities options. When there are options available, we have a better chance of solving the complex issues that confront our world. We do this through our journal conversations, ta-da, prop. There's also, more importantly for you, prop. On that table over there, if you haven't already gotten one, please make sure to take a copy on your way home. This is the latest issue of Conversations. It's number 32, and it's on the issue of conversion. It will give you a fleshed out version of the topics that we'll be discussing today. But every issue that comes out, the title really says it all, is a conversation. There's not one Torah true point of view. There are many Torah true points of view, and our job is to keep the conversation lively and active by putting forth the different opinions. Number 2, we also have a website that receives some 10,000 or more hits per month because people care. There's a thirst for this, and it's important for everybody in the community who cares about this issue of bridging rifts so that we can disagree while still getting along. you should be involved with the Institute. That's our sole purpose. We run teacher trainings. We have a new Sephardic initiative to get both into schools and the community a sense that the more voices that are out there, the better. Very often schools tend to focus on Ashkenazic views, which are excellent, but very often that is half of the Jewish story. And we find that it's critical to simply have the Sephardic voices in the mix, both in terms of history and rabbinic thinking. I run all over the place giving classes that try to bridge tradition, contemporary scholarship, and contemporary wisdom. And our writings and teachings pretty much all reflect that. We also have a university network where we reach many hundreds of university students all over the country because, let's face it, very often, no matter where they go, unless they have one of the 5 schools with a tremendous community or 10 schools, whatever it is, many of them feel like they're in a desert. They don't have a way of growing Jewishly other than through a Hillel or through a Chabad, but not necessarily through a modern Orthodox setting. And that's something that we are very interested in trying to promote as well. One of our newest initiatives as a strategic move is exactly what we are doing right now, a panel discussion. And specifically, these panel discussions we're going to be videoing so that it can be broadcast all over, but having them in multiple cities across the country. And the goal is not to create debates. Everybody likes a good debate and a controversy. That's what draws the biggest crowds. We're not interested in debate for the sake of debate. We're interested in community education. Let 2 experts in a field where they disagree with each other stand up here, or wherever that will be, and present their positions, and then let the community discuss, hearing learned opinions from 2 people who are really, in this case, truly experts. Questions that I'm sure are on many of our people's minds if we are community driven. One is just, what is the best standard for conversion? In America and all around the diaspora, intermarriage is a very pressing issue. It has been for quite some time. What approach should we take to couples that are interdating? A different question is when a Jewish couple adopts a child. What level of observance does that couple need to have and commit to raise that child Jewish so that we can convert the child? In Israel, the biggest and pressing issue is that we have hundreds of thousands of people from the former Soviet Union and elsewhere that identify as Jews and Israelis and who fight in the Israeli army and give their lives to the state, but they're not halachically Jewish. Either their mother's not Jewish or something else along the lines makes them not Jewish, but many of them, not all, but many of them actually would like to be considered Jews, or at least the rabbis might want them to be considered Jews, so they don't start intermarrying with each other. That's a real issue of the day. And so when I thought of this issue as this is what we should have a panel discussion on, it was actually the easiest invitation list I've ever had to create for anything. Because we have 2 people here who represent, I think, the very best, certainly in the American world, I would say in the world period, 2 of the really best voices, period, on the topic of conversion. We have here Rabbi Mark Angel. Rabbi Mark Angel is one of the leading voices on many, many rabbinic things. I think he's the best, but you might accuse me of filial loyalty from that point of view. But he's certainly one of the leading voices both in America and worldwide in so many areas of the rabbinate. He was a congregational rabbi for many, many years, was the president of the Rabbinical Council of America. There's a very lengthy resume. And then on top of that, it also has written and edited 36 books thus far. And just, it's the kind of thing, if you wake up tomorrow, watch out, there may be another, so stay tuned. And most recently, the founder and the director of the Institute, where my father, from the very beginning, it's really amazing to see how many articles and how many things he's written about the issue of conversion. And he has a very inclusive position, we'll call it, where his hero is Rabbi Ben Zion Uziel, who was the Sephardic chief rabbi at the time of the founding of the State of Israel. And he's been a very outspoken advocate of the notion that community rabbis should be able to make their own decisions. Each one should come up with his best judgment of what to do. And we'll hear a lot more from his position in just a little while. Rabbi Yonah Rees represents kind of the other side of the coin. Rabbi Yonah Rees is a phenomenal Talmid Chacham and represents to me, besides being I'll flatter myself and call you a good friend, but Rabbi Rees also represents that exactly what Judaism wants us all to know, which is, it should be obvious, but alas, it's not always, that the more of a Talmid Chacham you are, the better of a person you are. That should always be linked. It's not always. Rabbi Rees represents to me the pinnacle of bringing together God-fearing Talmid Chacham person who also really represents the best of Menschlichkeit, to use that word, in that sense. And I think he's a role model to me and to so many others who understand that very important combination. He's a Dayan. He's the head of the Beit Din For the Rabbinical Council of America, it's authority on conversion. He also is the head of the Chicago Beit Din and a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University. Here are two Talmidei Chachamim who represent principles that might differ today, but we're not casting it as a debate. Specifically, we want to present to the community, here are two principled stands on the issue of conversion with the question of what's really best for the Jewish people.
So, first of all, I want to express what a tremendous privilege and honor it is to speak in the presence of these two really august and legendary rabbis. Rabbi Mark Angel, who has distinguished himself in a very long and very illustrious career in the rabbinate, the former president, I don't know if this was mentioned, of the Rabbinical Council of America, and Rabbi Chaim Angel, who I'm also very privileged and honored to call a good friend of mine, if I can also exercise that prerogative. We, of course, are a completely invalid rabbinical court, and nobody would accept a single conversion that we perform because you can't have a father and son in the same bezdin. But other than that, I think that my attitude and my perspective is Chaverim Ko Yisrael, that it's not merely a good joke. The rabbis Amabim Shalom Ba'olam, that they bring peace into the world, but that really is our mission. That's our job. Sometimes the way in which you bring about this result is through machlokas l'shem shemayim. We say that any kind of dispute, which is really l'shem shemayim, where everybody's trying to do the right thing, we're all trying to follow God's will, so that's sofa l'hiskayim. What does it mean, sofa l'hiskayim is going to last? We don't want disputes to last, that everybody should beat each other's throats forever. That's not the idea, but the idea is sofa l'hiskayim is going to lead to a good result. So these discussions are a very fruitful and productive avenue towards leading to good things. I'd also like to clarify that I don't come into this discussion with any kind of preconceived notion as to which side of this debate is necessarily correct. I don't think that there is any specific mandate in the Gemara or the Shulchan Aruch for one or the other model, for conversions to be performed by local rabbis or for conversions to be performed by some sort of a centralized authority. What is required is that conversions be performed with professionalism and integrity and competence, that they be valid and that they fulfill the mandate of V'ahavtem es hager, that you're supposed to love the convert, you're supposed to try to build systems that will be good for the converts, good for the conversion process, and good for Klal Yisrael. So really, I happen to be in the position, as Rabbi Angel mentioned, of a chairman of the GPS committee for the Rabbinical Council of America, which means that I'm the chairman of the GPS, stands for, well, a navigation system. But in this case, it's a navigation system for converts. We preceded the other GPS system. It stands for Gerus Protocols and Standards, articulated by the Rabbinical Council of America in conjunction with the Beit Din of America, so that there could be more of a sense of uniformity of standards, more of a sense of a centralized, organized system for converts and for conversions that would serve the purposes of V'ahavtem es hager, extending loving kindness towards converts and having a process that would enable them to be treated properly and to have their conversions recognized across the world. So we just read in Parshas Lech Lecha that Avraham was given the name Avraham rather than Avram, and ki avamon goyim nesaticha, because I've made you the father of all the nations of the world. And the Rambam explains that what this means is that he was given the opportunity to bring in people into his view of monotheism, what would eventually lead to Judaism, to the Jewish people, and bring in people at all times from all over. That even though we know that Judaism is defined genetically in terms of somebody who has a Jewish mother, there would always be the opportunity throughout all the generations that we would be able to bring in converts, that through this special assignment that God gave to Abraham, we should always have an openness and a welcoming attitude towards anybody who wants to join the Jewish fold. And that the Medrash says on Parshas Lech Lecha that actually somebody who joins Judaism from the outside, who wasn't born Jewish, is on a higher level than somebody who was born Jewish. Because if you were born Jewish, that means that your ancestors were at Har Sinai. They stood at Mount Sinai, and they heard all of the thunder, they heard all the lightning, the thunderbolts, and they heard the voices, and they saw the lightning, and they heard the voice of God, and the blowing of the shofar blast at Har Sinai, and it was this awesome, spellbinding experience. So, of course, what choice did they have but to accept the Torah? It was so crystal clear to all of them that this was the right thing to do. But somebody who's a convert who comes from the outside, who wasn't standing and didn't have their ancestors standing at Mount Sinai, and they on their own enter into the covenant of having to observe 613 mitzvahs in the covenant of the Torah and the Jewish people. So says the Medrash, Yesh lecha chaviv mizeh? Do you think that there's anything more beloved or more cherished by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? These are the most cherished people. And that's the attitude that we all need to have. In addition, the Gemara indicates that there was some sort of a presence that even those who are the sincere converts throughout the generations who entered the Jewish people, they did have some sort of a presence at Har Sinai. Maybe their ancestors weren't physically present, but the Gemara says, Mazalayu havusham, that they had some sort of a, to use a constitutional term, they had some sort of a spiritual penumbra that was present at Mount Sinai, and they were always destined to become a part of the Jewish people. So it's important for a rabbinical court dealing with a sincere convert to recognize that just as the rabbis themselves were born Jewish, they're dealing with somebody who is destined, if they're a sincere convert, of course, who is destined to become Jewish, and they have to be treated with that level of sensitivity. And in fact, the entire conversion process mirrors the Har Sinai and mirrors the Mount Sinai experience. The Gemara in Maseches Krisu says that every single step of the conversion process is intended to replicate the similar step that occurred when the Jewish people as a totality entered into the covenant of Torah at Mount Sinai. So the Gemara derives from various verses that all the men went through circumcision at that point in time, and obviously that's part of the conversion process for a male. Both men and women went through an immersion process at that point in time, and that's also a critical part of the conversion process, immersing in a mikvah. And also, as Rav Soloveitchik writes, perhaps the most fundamental centerpiece of the conversion process was what? Was when everybody together at Mount Sinai said, Na'aseh v'nishma, that we're going to accept upon ourselves the yoke of commandments. That is the fundamental cornerstone of the conversion process, is the acceptance of the Torah. When you have somebody, says the Rambam, in any generation that is prepared to be mekabel ol mitzvos, somebody who mekabel olav ol Torah, somebody who's prepared to accept the yoke of commandments, then they go through these ritual steps of milah, of circumcision, of tevilah, of immersion in a mikvah, and this is what enables somebody to become a convert. So we understand that these basic components and steps of the conversion process are replicated, mirror what occurred at Har Sinai. But there's another major part of the process, and that's really a large part of what we're focusing upon today, in order to effectuate a valid conversion, and that is the betin, the rabbinical court. If somebody just jumps into the mikvah and says that they are accepting the yoke of commandments, but there is no rabbinical court there, they just jump in on their own, so then that's not a valid conversion. There has to be a validly constituted rabbinical court present at every single conversion. So the question is, how does that replicate the Mount Sinai experience? Why do you need this requirement of a betin? We understand it's derived from a scriptural verse. The Gemara in Yevamos says, Mishpat Ksibbe, that it says that the conversion process is a judicial proceeding. Therefore, it requires, Shlosha requires a betin made up of three qualified individuals. Mishpat Echad Yeh Lochem B'Lager, says there shall be one judicial law that is applicable to all Jews, including a convert. So this is the source for the requirement of a rabbinical court. But what's the reason? What's the connection to Mount Sinai? And there are two different explanations that are given by the authorities. One explanation, which you'll find in the writings of Rav Soloveitchik, is that the Beis Din mirrors HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. At Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, there was a covenant between the divine presence, between God, who is present with all of the fanfare at the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and there was the Jewish people who were entering into the covenant. So too with every single conversion, there's the convert who's entering into the covenant, and there is God. But instead of God showing up at Mount Sinai, he sends his surrogates. Who are the surrogates of God? the rabbinical court. That's what we recite every single Tuesday morning in our morning prayer service. We say, Elokim nitzah b'adas kel b'kerev Elokim yishpot. That God resides whenever there is a convening of a rabbinical court. B'kerev Elokim yishpot. Every single time that a judicial assembly is convened, a rabbinical court is convened, it's considered like the divine presence that God hovers over the rabbinical court. This is a very sobering reminder for those of us who serve as rabbinical court judges that we have an awesome responsibility because we're standing in for God, if you will, and therefore that increases the sanctity of the actions of a rabbinical court, but also their awesome responsibility. Second explanation is that at the time of Mount Sinai, the entirety of the nation stood in front of Mount Sinai, and that was necessary for the entering into the covenant. And the Beit Din serves as the representatives for the entirety of Klal Yisrael. That the Beit Din serves as the stand-in, as the Ba'ei Kocham, the power of attorney, so to speak, for the entire assembly of Israel. And that's why you need the rabbinical court at every single conversion in order to represent the Jewish people. So Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in an essay that he published in the Tradition Journal in 1988, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein explains that really both components need to be present with respect to the rabbinical court and with respect to the process of conversion. He says that the Beis Din represents, on the one hand, the process of a gerus, which is a process of a person seeking and yearning and connecting to God. And in that sense, the Beit Din stands for God's presence, whereby the Beit Din enables a connecting of this earnest individual who is seeking God to connect to God, or, as we explained, even maybe to reconnect to God. But at the same time, the Beit Din also represents the procedure of entering into the Jewish faith, the procedure of Kabbalas Hagerim, of there being an official judicial process where there is a rabbinical court representing the entirety of the Jewish people that decides on behalf of the Jewish people that we're going to bring and we admit this sincere conversion candidate into the ranks of Klal Yisrael, into the ranks of the Jewish people. And I think that these two complementary and critical components of the conversion process, both the process of connecting to God and the judicial procedure of going through the steps in order to be accepted by the rabbinical court for conversion, represent the tension of the current discussion that we are conducting this morning. On the one hand, gerus is an intimate, personal, and local process, and probably should be. It's about the individual's yearning and connecting to Hashem. As it says with respect to Rus, when Rus, who was the paradigmatic convert that we read about on Shavuos, when she showed her desire to join the Jewish people, it says, when they saw the tremendous yearning and striving of Rus, when Naomi was trying to talk her out of becoming a convert to Judaism, saw how Rus was just not going to let go, no matter how hard she tried. So she stopped discouraging her. She stopped dissuading her, because this was a personal journey, a personal connecting that Rus had with God. On the other hand, the gerus process and procedure is also about, as the Gemara says, that if a man gives a ring to a woman and says, "You're hereby betrothed to me as soon as I convert." He's not converted yet. And he says, "But I want it to take effect as soon as I convert." So we say that normally you can't effectuate a status when you don't have the ability to effectuate it right now, even if you make a condition that it's something that should take place at a later point in time, unless it's completely in your control. So the question is it in a person's control to convert? So the Gemara says, no, it's not in the person's control to convert, because because who says that the person's going to find the rabbinical court that's going to be willing to convert the person? There's also that critical component of the community represented by the Beit Din making that determination that they feel that this particular candidate is a suitable candidate for conversion to the Jewish people, and that is a part of the procedure of a conversion. And one of our most important jobs is to address these two different aspects of the conversion process and navigate them in such a way that neither one of them overwhelms or undermines the other. So let's talk about the advantages of having the local Rav be the sole arbiter of the conversion process. Obviously, the local Rav would also have to have 2 other rabbis that would join together with him in order to perform a conversion. And let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of having a more centralized system. So the advantages of having a local Rav is that you're able to satisfy the first mandate much better. You're able to satisfy the personal sensitivity that is required with respect to a convert. The Gemara tells us that there are 24 or 36 or 46 times in the Torah, depending on how you count, in which the Torah admonishes us about the importance of loving a convert and not causing stress or oppression to a convert. You may not oppress a convert. You're obligated to love the convert. As the Gemara in Shabbos indicates, there's a special requirement, even more so than in our regular daily interactions, to show sensitivity and forbearance to a convert or to a conversion candidate than with respect to other dealings or other people. And that is what the Gemara refers to as the Anvis Hanuso Shel Hillel, that one is always supposed to be as forbearing as Hillel was. He had 3 wacky conversion candidates who came in front of him, said, "Oh, convert me while I'm standing on 1 foot," and things like that. And the Gemara says that Shammai was very harsh, and he rejected all of these candidates, and Hillel was very loving and forbearing and understanding and patient, and he admitted all of these candidates. And the Gemara says that particularly in the context of dealing with conversion candidates, we're always supposed to adopt the attitude of a Hillel rather than the attitude of a Shammai, and that's something which a local Rav on a very personal and intimate level, I think is able to do better than if you have a nameless bureaucracy which is looking over the process. On the other hand, individual rabbis also have disadvantages. Number one, they have the potential of pressures. There's a wealthy balabas whose daughter or son is engaged to somebody who's not Jewish and who pressures the rabbi to perform a quickie conversion, even where there isn't necessarily a sincerity to accept the yoke of commandments by the person, where it's not proper to perform a conversion under those circumstances. The Gemara says, "Ra achara tavon makabel gerim." Bad things happen to those people who accept converts. And Tosfos asks the question, what do you mean? Isn't there a mitzvah to accept sincere converts? So Tosfos says, yes, but it's a bad thing when you accept somebody too quickly and too precipitously without making sure that they are, in fact, a sincere convert who is accepting the yoke of commandments and going through a proper process. Number two, there are varying standards that local rabbis can have. Some local rabbis may really know the laws of conversion very, very well and may have very rigorous standards, but others may not be that knowledgeable. We had a case where there was a local rabbi who performed conversions for many years, and unlike this situation where the 2 rabbis sitting at this table know that they can't sit together on a conversion court, this particular rabbi didn't realize that he wasn't supposed to sit together with his brother on a conversion court, and whenever he needed to perform a conversion, he would call over his brother from an adjacent town and they would do the conversion. Every single conversion was invalid because intrinsically a bet-in with 2 brothers sitting on it is an invalid bet-in. And there were also cases of rabbis who simply did not know the laws of what has to be taught to a convert, or that it's important for a convert to go through an acceptance of any mitzvahs altogether. And another disadvantage that arises from that is that when the world out there, the rabbinic world out there, is aware that there are rabbis who don't know how to do conversions properly, so that causes a suspicion whenever there is any conversion performed by a local rabbi. The chief rabbinate in Israel, the chief rabbinate in London or Paris or any other place in the world may say that how do we know that we should trust this particular local rabbi? Maybe this rabbi is one of the rabbis who doesn't know how to perform conversions properly, who has a relative sitting on the rabbinical court, who is pressured to perform quickie conversions when there isn't really any sincere acceptance of mitzvahs. Or maybe there were unfortunately rabbis that would say to people, I'm happy to perform an Orthodox conversion, just give me $25,000. And there was one rabbi that was advertised in the South American community where for some reason there was a great desire to travel in and get an Orthodox conversion so that they could marry whomever they want in their various towns. And there were rabbis who advertised their services. If you pay a certain price, you'll get off the airport and get off the airplane, and there's a mikveh right near the airport where I'll perform the conversion for you. And I know that such things happen. I spoke to such rabbis. There wasn't necessarily a tremendous sense of shame. But unfortunately, when these types of things occur, so it casts aspersions on any particular person who's operating in an individual capacity without there being some type of a framework and some type of a system of controls which is built in. So now let's talk about the advantage of a centralized system of conversion. So the advantages are, number one, precisely the sense of quality control. You have uniform standards, so then there is at least a commitment on the part of the different rabbis that they're going to accept upon themselves these standards, that they're not going to accept money for conversions, for example, outside of a certain administrative fee, which is set forth in the published standards. The converts know what to expect because everything is published ahead of time in terms of the expectations and responsibilities of the Beit Din. There is a clear articulation of what the standards for the acceptance of mitzvot, the acceptance of commandments is supposed to be in terms of Shabbos, kashrus, brachos, whatever else is going to be required by the Beit Din. And it also gives a comfort level for those rabbinical bodies around the world that they don't have to question the conversions afterwards, because they know that if a conversion took place within this system, it's presumptively valid. It's a conversion that they can count upon and not question, and then the converts don't have to suffer from the vagaries and vicissitudes of having rabbis in other countries question the validity of their conversion 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, or question the validity of their conversion when it comes time for their children to get married or for their grandchildren to get married. And we all know of horror stories of this type. It doesn't mean that it's correct for these rabbinical bodies to question conversions, but at the same time, we all know that this happens, and sometimes it is legitimate given the varied standards and stories that are out there. And therefore, if you have a centralized system which has a good reputation, where the standards have been vetted, where the rabbinical judges have been vetted, and so forth, so it leads to wider and easier acceptance of all of the conversions. I've been involved with this network of the GPS network for the past 10 years or so, however long it has been around, 10, 11 years. And during this period of time, it has performed over 2,000 conversions, and thank God, none of those converts, to the best of my knowledge, have ever had the validity of their conversions questioned. So that itself is a major benefit and advantage of having a centralized system. And also there is the lessening of outside and external pressures that could be placed on the Beit Din, because even if the local rabbi who might be sponsoring the candidate is subject to those pressures, the rabbinical court itself, which is under more centralized authority, which is usually separate and distinct from the sponsoring rabbi, will not be subject to those pressures. They can play, the bad cop, or however you want to put it. But if it's clear that the conversion is not warranted, nobody's going to be easily pressured into an illegitimate conversion. The negative side is that once you have a more centralized system, so then it does become more bureaucratic, and there is the greater possibility that you won't have that same personal touch, a personal sensitivity between at least the Beit Din that meets with the candidate and the candidate himself or herself. I should say herself or himself, because 75% of conversion candidates are female. And additionally, you might not have the same easiness of flexibility that might be required in special delicate cases where maybe there needs to be a relaxation of certain procedural requirements that would otherwise be appropriate for a standard candidate, but might not be appropriate for an individual candidate. So really the goal, I think the goal that we all share, or should share, in my opinion, is to develop a system that tries to reflect the advantages of both the localized type of conversion model and the advantages of the centralized type of model, while trying to weed out the disadvantages and the potential problems of either of these two models. Maybe that's why the Talmud says, Kashim Gerim L'Yisrael Kisapachas, that converts are as troublesome to the Jewish community as a wart on the skin. That doesn't sound very nice, but that's the statement in the Talmud. And the question is, what did the Talmud mean by this cryptic statement? And there are many, many different interpretations that are given. The Tosfos has interpretations ranging from, well, converts are very troublesome because when people are coming from a different type of background, there's more of a chance of backsliding back to where they came from, and they might not remain observant after the conversion takes place. That's one interpretation. To a completely opposite interpretation, which was given by none other than Rabbi Avraham, the convert, who's quoted by Tosfos. Rav Soloveitchik brought a proof from here from Rabbi Avraham, the convert, that you can give smicha to a convert, because otherwise how did he become Rabbi Avraham, the convert? And Rabbi Avraham, the convert, says that you know why converts are so troublesome, like a worn in the skin. They are troublesome because they put the rest of the Jewish people to shame through their tremendous commitment and their tremendous sincerity and their tremendous enthusiasm. I remember I had a conversion candidate that I asked at the end of the process. I said, is there any question you have, anything that bothers you in whatever you've learned about Judaism, whatever you've experienced about Judaism that you want to express before we finalize the conversion? And this candidate said, yeah, one thing that bothers me is that I get so excited about participating in a Jewish festival, participating in a Jewish ritual, because I learned about it, now I'm able to put it to practice. And then I go to these homes, these people are getting ready for Pesach, and they're so miserable. And everything is like such a chore and such a burden for them, and I don't say, why aren't they as enthusiastic as I am? So they put us to shame. So that's what Rabbi Avraham Ger says, that the converts put the rest of the Jewish people to shame. But I think there's another interpretation that is also found in Tosfos. Tosfos says that one of the troublesome things happens to be that there are so many prohibitions that the Torah includes about how you're not allowed to be insensitive to the convert. It's very difficult to treat a convert properly. And because they're coming from a unique vantage point, because it is so difficult to be accepted and to integrate into the community, it's very easy to say the wrong thing and to do the wrong thing, and it's very difficult to fulfill this precept of treating converts properly. So I think that's the same thing for us, that this is also true with respect to the rabbinical courts. Maybe the statement of Chazal that says, Kashim Gerim Yisrael, that converts are troublesome for the Jewish people, is addressed to the rabbinical court. It's troublesome because we have a mandate that we have to have a process which is one of integrity, one of professionalism, where we do things right, where we're not accepting people wrongly or precipitously or in a corrupt fashion either, and we're not taking advantage of the vulnerability of the converts. But at the same time, we also have to make sure to be very sensitive to the sincerity of their process, and we also have to make sure to have a system in place which is going to treat them properly and which is going to enable for a universal recognition of the validity of their conversions. So when this idea of a centralized system was first discussed, I was working at the time as the director of the Beth Din of America. This was maybe about, I can't remember, 12, 13 years ago when we started to enter into these discussions. So I myself, just for the record, I was initially a skeptic of the system. I was a skeptic because the way that it worked up until then was that, we knew that there were some different rabbis of varying standards, and there were certain rabbis we were comfortable with the standards. At least the chief rabbinical judge of the Beth Din of America, Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz, was comfortable with their standards, and others where he wasn't as comfortable with their standards. Maybe there were non-mechitza congregations, maybe he didn't feel that there was a requisite acceptance of mitzvahs, so they didn't know enough about conversion laws for their conversions to be accepted, whatever it was. And therefore, there would be certain rabbis where he would give an ishur. He would give a certification for their conversions, and other rabbis where he was not comfortable giving a certification for the conversions. And the Beth Din even tried to have an investigation into different conversions to determine when to give a certification, when not to give a certification. You'll say, why need a certification altogether? The problem was that people, the converts, would go off to places like Eretz Yisrael, and the chief rabbinate would say, we're not going to accept your conversion unless you have a certification from a recognized institutional Beth Din, because they didn't go for this business of local rabbis before conversions. They saw there were so many problems with different local rabbis, so they wanted to know who's certified. And this created problems, number one, because really, if you're not performing the conversion yourself, or you don't have a sense of centralized standards, so you try to get it right, but who knows if for sure the person who's certifying the conversion can speak about it with the same authority as if that person would be performing the conversion himself. And number two, this also led to tremendous recriminations, because there were rabbis who complained bitterly. How come the Ab Bezdin is certifying the conversions of this rabbi and not certifying the conversions that I'm performing? And it really was a very unwieldy system. And to add to the complexities and to the headaches, at a certain point in time, maybe because of the fact that it was an unwieldy system, the chief rabbinate of Israel said, we don't want to accept this system anymore. We have a centralized system of conversions ourselves, and we want there to be a centralized system of conversions in America for us to be comfortable accepting the conversions. We're not comfortable with this certification system. We think that it's too prone to a possible error. So it wasn't really because of that specific policy change of the chief rabbinate that the system was created. There had been a movement Over that period of time, there was another group as well that was trying to institute a system of centralized conversion courts in America. The Rabbinical Council of America had that discussion for a number of times, for a number of years, with a number of the rabbis at different occasions. And based on, I'd say, the confluence of all these different considerations, we decided that we would try to put something like that in place. And from out of all of these discussions and this background and this backdrop emerged the GPS. And I remember being part of the original GPS committee, where we worked on devising the standard guidelines, and there was a lot of robust discussion and debate. It's a very interesting historical chapter, particularly here in Manhattan, because here in Manhattan, you had a number of different rabbis who were involved in conversion, and they had their own communities and their own community sensitivities that they were concerned about if there would be a more centralized system. And I remember that we had meetings in the homes of different very prominent rabbis in the community. I think some present today in the audience may have been, at one or two of those meetings, and we discussed at great length all of the pros and all of the cons. And at the end of the day, one of the major achievements of this whole GPS network was to create a Manhattan Beis Din, a unified Manhattan Beis Din that brought together many of the different shuls, ranging from shuls that were very modern to shuls that were very right-wing, shuls across the 5 boroughs of New York City and some of the adjacent communities as well. The person who took upon the mantle of being the Av Beis Din, the chief rabbinical judge of this Manhattan Beis Din, was none other than Rav Hershel Schachter, Rosh Kollel at Yeshiva University. And there were, sometimes little wrinkles that needed to be smoothed out over the years. But that Beis Din has probably performed more conversions than any of the other 11 or so Batei Din across North America that are members of this GPS network. And I have to tell you, it's really been l'shem u'l'seferis. It's really been something that has brought tremendous pride. It has enabled there to be more of a streamlining of standards, but also more of an acceptance by those who go through this process of their conversions after the fact, that we've eliminated many of the bureaucratic hassles that people were having when they would make Aliyah, want to get married in Israel, and things of that variety. And also we've eliminated many of the problems of the conversions where mistakes would creep into the conversions because people just didn't know better because of the fact that there is greater oversight. That doesn't mean that it's perfect. Even if you have a centralized system, at the beginning what we tried to do was to balance having a centralized system while still respecting certain localized Batei Din, certain localized rabbinical courts. They weren't necessarily under an institutional rabbinical court type of a framework, and to enable them to simply say that they were going to accept the standards of the system and basically to continue to operate. Certain Batei Din that had been deemed acceptable in the past continue to operate under the GPS. And we had this absolutely, okay, I'm going to give me 2 more minutes. Yeah. Terrible scandal involving a Beis Din in Washington, D.C. I don't think that I have to elaborate. People are aware of this situation. I have to tell you that after that whole situation arose, I really said that I think the whole system should be dismantled because it's so impossible to be able to monitor people so precisely. You're going to have guidelines that say, oh, by the way, when you perform a conversion, don't take out a gun and shoot the convert in the mikveh. There are certain things which you just wouldn't imagine that a person would ever commit. But what really surprised me about the aftermath of that particular incident is that the conversion candidates in Washington, D.C. came to the leadership of the GPS and they said, please create a new Beis Din entity for our area because we need the GPS. We just need a better Beis Din. We need a Beis Din. We need better controls. We need a better system of being able to vet and supervise the dayanim and the processes and so forth. But we desperately need the system. And I thought this is a tremendous tribute to the strength of the system that we can address even a problem of this enormous magnitude. And then over the next period of months, I personally went down to Washington, D.C. Rabbi Tzvi Ram, who's the Menahel, the director of the Beis Din in Manhattan, went down and we trained the Rabbanim of the VAD, of the local Rabbinic Association of Washington, D.C., to develop a different Bezdin model that would be more faithful to the principles and to the objectives and to the mission of the GPS. And we worked with them over the course of about a year and a half or so until they felt like they were ready themselves to perform the conversions on their own. And now there's a beautiful, wonderful Bezdin entity that is in Washington, D.C. that continues to serve the converts. So from just the way in which the ending of the story unfolded, that gave me a renewed faith and a sense of optimism into the GPS and what the GPS actually could accomplish. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos, when he's talking about the mitzvah of loving a convert, notes that when it comes to a convert, there's the regular mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you're supposed to love your fellow Jew like yourself. But there's the additional mitzvah of v'ahavta mesager, that you have to love the converts. And he says, why is this additional dimension of this extra sense of love that's supposed to be showered upon the converts? So he writes very, very interestingly, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself has a special relationship with converts. It's a special affection of ahava, a special affection, a special love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showers upon these people who come from the outside and want to be a part of Klal Yisrael, want to be part of the Jewish people. And I think that it behooves all of us to, whether we're born Jewish, whether we converted into the faith, just to recognize this special level of affection that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, that part of our mission in this world is to be able to emulate God. And therefore, just as God has this extra level of affection towards converts, towards the conversion process, we have to always have that extra level of affection, extra level of sensitivity. We have a tremendous responsibility to do everything that we can in order to produce proper conversions, in order to produce professional conversions, in order to produce responsible conversions and conversions that will be universally respected. We owe it to the convert, we owe it to the Jewish people, and we owe it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Rees. Thank you, Rabbi Chaim Angel, for your introduction before. I want to start with a parable. Imagine you look at a painting, and you look at it every day and every night, and you know it. You know every detail, every shadow, every nuance. And if anyone were to ask you, do you know that painting? You'll say, I know it perfectly. I spent years looking at it. And then someone comes along and turns on a light, and you realize that all you were looking at was one little square out of a whole big canvas. Doesn't mean that the square is false, but it means you have to stand back and evaluate. What is the whole picture? I'd like to take that parable and apply it to our situation as it relates to conversion today. Since the middle of the 1800s, people have been saying what conversion is. A complete acceptance of every mitzvah from 613 mitzvot, and that's what conversion is. But if we turn on the light, we realize in the last couple hundred years, a lot of things have happened. It happens that today, in the olden days, before 1800, let's say, very rarely did someone want to become Jewish. It was almost impossible for a Jewish Bedin to convert. They did, but it was rare. In Muslim countries, if you converted someone, you were punishable by death. In most Christian countries before modern period, the same thing. It was very risky. Conversion was a topic that was hardly ever discussed. It didn't start getting discussed until the 19th century, when suddenly Jews were getting emancipated in Europe, and Jews were mixing with non-Jews. And suddenly there was intermarriage. And the rabbis had to know how to deal with intermarriage. In the year 1800, almost every Jew in the world, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, and everything in between, was religiously observant. By the year 1900, the overwhelming majority of Jews were not Shomrei Shabbat. A radical change, tremendous change. And the rabbis living during that century of transition had to cope. How are we supposed to deal with those who wish to convert? How are we supposed to deal with intermarriage? And some rabbis, mainly in Eastern Europe, took a very narrow view. They said, unless a person is willing to convert, to accept every mitzvah, the person cannot be Jewish, cannot be converted. And Rabbi Shmelkus in 1876 was the first person on record, according to the research of Dr. Tzvi Zohar. He was the first person on record who said that if a person converts to Judaism and does not have the intention of keeping every mitzvah, the conversion is invalid. And how do we know the person had intention to keep all the mitzvot? Well, if they're observant or not. So it means every person who converted, following this shita, was always on probation. Because it could turn out that 20 years later, the person went to McDonald's and ate a cheeseburger, and the rabbis will say, your conversion is invalid, retroactively. And this is not imagination. This is happening in Israel all the time. I want to read something from Rabbi Shaul Farber, who's head of E-Team, who works day and night on the issues of conversion. During the last decade, the state of Israel has struggled to refine policies related to conversion to Judaism. There have been a number of conversion annulments, even more attempted annulments, some of which have been rejected by Israeli rabbinical courts. Others were dealt with by the Supreme Court. There have been hundreds of cases of converts who were unrecognized by local rabbinics. Hundreds more who converted overseas were denied entry into Israel under the law of return. Thousands who sought conversion in Israel but were unable to convert through the national system, either because the process was too burdensome or alternatively because they were rejected out of hand by the Ministry of the Interior. At a time when thousands, hundreds of thousands of people want to become Jewish, the rabbinic establishment, instead of saying Baruch haba, are making life more constricted. Instead of finding ways to deal with the situation with the lights on, we don't live in the same reality anymore. We're not living in Eastern Europe in 1876. We're living in America or in the state of Israel. 100 years ago, when the responses were being written, there was no state of Israel. There was no responsibility to deal with hundreds and thousands of people at one time. Conversions were one here, one there, a few hundred a year, maybe a few thousand over 10 years. But who imagined that so many thousands and thousands of Jews, thousands and thousands of non-Jews, would want to become Jewish? And what do? We establish bureaucracies that say we want to have uniform standards. What do uniform standards mean? It's a code word. It's a code word to mean we want to follow the most extreme positions in halakha. What is halakha? I want to tell you a personal experience. When I was a student in yeshiva way back when, we learned from Rabbi Melech Shechter that if a person converts to Judaism without the express statement that he or she will follow all the mitzvah from top to bottom, the conversion is not valid at all. And that's what we all learned. And that's just perfect in line with what the 19th century Eastern European rabbis were teaching. One day, when I was in rabbinical school, I was in a Jewish bookstore downtown, Lower East Side. They still had bookstores in those days. And I saw a volume, Mishpatei Uziel. And I had heard of Rabbi Uziel. My rabbi in Seattle had been a student of Rabbi Uziel, but I never read his responsa. I opened the book, and I could sing a song. Rabbi Uziel, you certainly changed my life. Your mom has changed my life. I started reading Rabbi Uziel, and I realized everything I learned is a part of the picture, but not the whole picture. Halakha is much bigger than we were told. Rabbi Uziel was asked a number of questions from people, from rabbis around the world. And the question that he had to deal with was, am I allowed to convert a woman who wants to marry a Jewish man? Can we convert people who are not going to be observant? Rabbi Uziel said as follows: after examining all the sources, from all that has been stated and discussed, the ruling follows that it is possible and a mitzvah. He doesn't say maybe, he says it's a mitzvah to accept male and female converts, even if it is known to us they will not observe the mitzvot, because in the end they will come to fulfill them. We are committed to make this kind of opening for them, for if they do not fulfill this mitzvot, they will bear their own iniquities, and we are innocent. Later on he says, a Jewish man married to a non-Jewish woman, they're not observant. The husband brings a wife to convert. Rabbi Uziel says, convert her. And he says, I fear, if we push the children away, completely by not accepting their parents for conversion, we shall be brought to judgment by the heavenly court. And they will say to us, you did not bring back those who were driven away, and those who were lost you did not seek. By not accepting these people, you're committing a sin against them and their families. Rabbi Uziel wrote, I admit without any embarrassment that my heart is filled with trembling for every Jewish soul that is assimilated among the non-Jews. I feel in myself a duty and a mitzvah to open the door to repentance, to save Jews from assimilation by invoking arguments for leniency. This is the way of Torah, in my humble opinion. This is what I received from my parents and my teachers. Rabbi Uziel was talking about a macro problem. Yes, in 1600 or 1700, rabbis might have had one certain point of view. But in the 20th century, and certainly in the 21st century, when intermarriage was becoming so rampant, how could the rabbis not take responsibility to try to save Jewish families? How can rabbis try to make things more difficult for people who want to enter the Jewish fold? Rabbi Uziel pointed out historically, if you look at the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, they do not follow the standards of the GPS. They're much more liberal than the current establishment. When the establishment says we want to create uniform standards, it means basically we do not want to give an individual rabbi the right to draw on the full toolbox of halakha. There are many opinions. Rabbi Chaim Amsalem, who is a phenomenal Talmid Chacham, wrote books, Mizera Yisrael, volumes, 2 volumes, heavy volumes, and he has smaller volumes, in which he reviews from the beginning of Talmudic literature till modern times all of the discussions by so many rabbis over the centuries, and he finds that the opinions of Rabbi Shmelkes and others was a minority opinion. The majority opinion was much more liberal, much more open-minded, and much more receptive. And yet, when they tell us we want to have uniform standards, it's not uniform standards. It's basically, I like to say, Haredi standards. They're standards which are fine. If you want to have those standards, you're welcome to it. But to impose those standards on the entire Jewish people is to shut the lights. It's to say there's no future for the Jewish people. It's to say we're going to satisfy ourselves with a few hundred, a few thousand conversions over the course of many years, rather than dealing with the macro problem that we're facing. So many individuals who would like to convert through halakha get turned off by the bureaucracy. They get turned off by rabbis who are too weak to take responsibility for it. The Rabbinical Council of America, when the first discussion came up, and Rabbi Reese, you probably were involved in those conversations, you all know I was very much against accepting the chief rabbinate's opinion and establishing a centralized committee. And people said, well, some of the local rabbis, they're afraid of the rich balabatim. I said, those people shouldn't be rabbis. If they're so gutless that they have no responsibility, then they shouldn't be rabbis. Well, some people take money for it. Some people are crooks. Some people don't. They have two brothers sitting on the bet din. You know what? Throw them out of the RCA. Instead of making all the rabbis of the RCA pasul, throw out those who are the bad eggs. It happened historically, and I know from my own day. I've been in the rabbinate for 50 years practically. In the olden days, before this GPS business, whenever a rabbi in the RCA did a conversion, it was accepted in Israel. The chief rabbis did accept them in Israel. How? They used to have Rabbi Hollander, used to be our representative in Israel. He used to go to all the Batei Din and give the RCA directories. And when they received a conversion, and they wanted to know was it done by an RCA rabbi, they could look in the book. And as soon as it was done by the RCA rabbi, that was fine. When questions arose that some RCA rabbis weren't doing a good job, so the rabbis in Israel, correctly so, made a stink. It's not right for these people to do conversions. There are too many of them. There's something shady about it. It was the RCA's responsibility to stand behind all of its rabbis, to tell the chief rabbinate in Israel, our system is we defend the honor and the integrity of all of our rabbis. And those rabbis we feel we cannot defend, we expel from the organization. Or we call them in for a discussion of their standards, and we see what's what. So many times, people would like to convert to Judaism, and they get scared by the GPS, or they get scared by the Rabbanut in Israel. I know personally, because I get dozens of calls all the time. I know for a fact how many people have been rejected by, or been nervous by, or been intimidated by. And the problem that the GPS has caused, it has emasculated the American rabbinate. It's made all the local rabbis into puppets. One time there was a Rosh Yeshiva who said, at an RCA convention, to the local rabbis, your job is to hold people's hands and be nice and say hello and goodbye to your congregants. When you have a tough question, you have to ask me. That's not the rabbinate. That's not the rabbinate. You don't tell people, you're not competent to do a conversion, you have to send it to the Bet Din. We're afraid you're not going to be good enough. We're afraid you're not going to be strong enough. God forbid. What does the Gemara say about standards? The Talmud in Yevamot, our rabbis taught, if at the present time a person desires to become a proselyte, he is to be addressed as follows. Why do you come to be a proselyte? Do you not know that Israel is persecuted and oppressed? The person says, I know, and yet I am unworthy, but I still wish to convert. Here's the Gemara. He is converted forthwith. He is given instruction in some of the minor and some of the major commandments. It doesn't say he has to go to school for 2 years. It doesn't say he has to follow the uniform standards. He is instructed in some of the commandments, some of the major and some of the minors, as he is informed of the punishment of the transgressions. So is he is to be informed of the reward. He is not, however, to be persuaded or dissuaded too much. In other words, we want this person to come through. If the person took the initiative to come to us to convert, yes, we have to, of course, tell them there are misvot, there are responsibilities that you have. But ultimately, we want the person to cross that threshold. We don't want to discourage them too much. We want them to be able to come in and be accepted. If you look at the Gemara, the rabbis are fond of saying, to be a Talmid Chacham, to learn the laws of Gerut is so complicated, so hard. There are exactly 2 simanim in the Shulchan Aruch. There's a whole tractate on Kiddushin. To do weddings is much more complicated halachically than to do a conversion. Much more complicated. I'm waiting for them now to institute a GPS for weddings. That rabbis shouldn't do weddings anymore. Because in Israel they can't do weddings unless they go through the Rabbanut too. The system is not good. It's not healthy and it's not halachically mandated. Rambam tells us, if a person, Rambam says as follows, this is the strangest case possible. Hilchot Isur Biyah. A proselyte who was not examined as to his motives, was not informed of the mitzvot or their punishments, but he was circumcised and immersed in the presence of 3 laymen, not Talmidei Chachamim, 3 Hedyodot, is a proselyte, even if it is known that he converted for some ulterior motive. Once he has been circumcised and immersed, he has left the status of being a non-Jew, and we suspect him until his righteousness is clarified. Even if he recanted and worshipped idols, he is a Jewish apostate. If he betroths a Jewish woman, it's valid. If he loses something, you have to return it to him as though he was a fellow Jew. The Rambam is telling us an amazing thing. I'm sure he's not in favor of this as a lechatchila position. We don't want converts like this. But he's telling us that if a person converts without even knowing what the mitzvot are, without even knowing what his motive is, and he's circumcised and goes to the mikvah, that person is Jewish. And if he marries a Jewish woman, it's a valid marriage. The GPS won't tell you that. They won't give you fallback positions. We know that rabbis across the country, and in Israel as well, are facing real serious problems. Orthodoxy is not immune from intermarriage problems. And besides intermarriage, there are many sincere non-Jews who really want to be Jewish. Jews are always amazed. Someone who's not Jewish wants to be Jewish? We're attractive. There's something beautiful and meaningful. I took a cab a few years ago, and had a lady cab driver, Irish, and she saw me with a kippah, and said, I'm so glad to see you're Jewish. I want to marry a Jewish man, because Jewish men are so good to their wives. Yeah. Jewish cab driver, a non-Jewish cab driver wouldn't have said that 200 years ago. We're a desirable group of people. People want to be Jewish, and what happens? When thousands upon thousands of people want to be Jewish, we say, we're going to build a bureaucracy. And we're going to guarantee that if you go through the bureaucracy, you'll be accepted. What does accepted mean? Let's say there are 3 good kosher RCA rabbis who do a conversion not through the GPS system. Or let's say in Israel, they now have a Giyur Kalacha with Rabbi Amsalem and Rabbi Riskin and a group of other Orthodox rabbis who do conversions, not through the system. Are those people Jewish or not Jewish? So the answer is they're not accepted. Not accepted by whom? In the eyes of God, those people are Jews. Will the GPS say these people are not accepted or they're not Jewish, and therefore they could go out and eat a ham sandwich? Will they say these people are not Jewish, they can therefore go out and smoke a cigar on Shabbat? They're not accepted. Who gives them the right to say who's accepted and who's not accepted? If a conversion was done by proper authorities, that conversion is valid in the eyes of God and should be valid by everybody. In Israel now, I just was speaking with Rabbi Amsalem last week, he was in town. They have this Giyur Halacha, where there's a group of Orthodox rabbis in Israel who can't stand the Rabbanut. I don't know why. Very difficult group to deal with. I wouldn't want to trust them with anything. But there's an Orthodox group of rabbis who says that the Rabbanut is not able to deal with the problem as it exists. And therefore they offer free conversion. Come to us, we'll convert you for free of charge, and we'll teach you the halachot and mitzvot, whatever they require. And they did that, so that the case went to the Supreme Court. Someone went through that system and not through the Rabbanut. Are they Jews or are they not Jews? So the State of Israel, Department of Interior, the Supreme Court said they're Jews for the purposes of being Jews in Israel. For the law of return, they're Jews. But if they want to go get married, they got to go through the Rabbanut. And the Rabbanut will say, you're not accepted. You're not Jews. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a bureaucracy which is filled with arrogance. Not this rabbi. He's not arrogant. It's the system. The system is built in such a way that it takes people who are perfectly halakhic Jews and it puts a question mark on them. And what's worse is a group of rabbis in Israel from the very Haredi group, which have a tremendous impact on the Rabbanut in Israel. And in our journal, which you got today, you'll read many articles dealing with this subject. They annul conversions. There was a case in Ashdod where a woman was married for 15 years and had children, a woman convert, and she came to get a get. And she turned out that she wasn't observant at the time. And the Bet Din said, you're not Jewish, you don't need a get, your children are not Jews. And they went all the way to the high rabbinical court. The rabbinical court stuck with the court in Ashdod. You know what? That woman is Jewish. That woman was converted properly. Rambam says if it's a person converted and then worshipped idols, they're still Jewish. Because this woman wasn't as observant as the higher uniform standards, they say, we don't accept you. What do you mean you don't accept me? This person is Jewish. There's a travesty going on, ladies and gentlemen. The reason I get so upset about this is I'm trying not to show my anger, because for the same reasons that Rabbi Rees was saying, we have an obligation to care for those non-Jews who want to become Jewish. And especially if they're Mizera Yisrael, especially if they have Jewish background. Rabbi Amsalem is now working in South America to bring back thousands and thousands of people who are called Bnei Anusim. Their ancestors were converted forcibly in Spain and Portugal, and they want to come back to Judaism. And if they go to the Bet Din can't even handle them. They can handle 1 case, 2 cases, 5 cases. Can they handle 1,000 cases? They can't. What's necessary is for local rabbis to be empowered to go out and do the job. Certainly we don't want irresponsible people doing the job. Certainly we don't want people who are ignorant. They don't know that you can't have your brother on a Bet Din. That's certain. But there's a way to enforce those kind of standards without crimping the style of the local rabbis. We have to have our freedom, and we have to have our integrity. And the bureaucracy robs us of those things, not just personally. It robs the community of a vehicle for bringing in many thousands of people into Judaism. And more than that, it robs the state of Israel of the honor and dignity of knowing how to treat a major part of its own population. How sad it is when people in Israel have to go to Cyprus to get married because they don't trust the Rabbanut or the Rabbanut won't accept them. What a shame and a disgrace it is for halakha. What a shame and a disgrace it is for halakha that we have no way, intelligent way, of coping with the magnitude of this problem. For many, many years, we were taught only one little square in a painting. And that little square has truth in it. There's goodness in it. I'm not denigrating it too much. But it's only a piece of the picture. If we turn on the lights and realize we need a visionary rabbinate and a visionary community to support that visionary rabbinate. Without a community behind us, we're dead. We can't get to first base. But the community itself has to be able to stand behind rabbis who will say we're not going to be tools in a bureaucracy which ultimately hurts the Jewish people. We have to be able to turn on the lights for the sake of ourselves, for the sake of converts, for the sake of God, and for the sake of Bnei Israel.